She's a Deputy Assistant Administrator for Pollution Prevention at EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, OCSPP. In this role, she oversees the environmentally preferable purchasing program and safer choice, P2 grants and green chemistry awards. She also works to integrate pollution prevention considerations into OCSPP's environmental justice work and OCSPP's contributions towards addressing the marine litter crisis. Prior to her appointment at EPA, she was a legal associate at the Surfrider Foundation, a nonprofit environmental organization where she led the Plastic Pollution Initiative. She's the author of Can I Recycle This? A Guide to Better Recycling and How to Reduce Single-Use Plastics, and has more than a decade of experience in plastic pollution prevention policy and recycling. Her advocacy began by founding plasticbaglaws.org in 2010, by which she established herself as a national expert on single-use plastic reduction policy. She was instrumental in passing landmark bills at the state and local levels in California and in New York that have since become the model for plastics reduction policies nationwide. An attorney by training, she is a member of the state bars of both California and New York. That's pretty impressive. And earned her JD from the Golden State University School of Law. She also holds a bachelor's degree or bachelor's degrees in zoology, environmental studies, and black studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Jennie Romer. Okay.
And we found the right table, so.
Yeah, that's right, perfect. Okay, so question 1. You are the first Deputy Assistant Administrator for Pollution Prevention at EPA. I love that EPA has elevated P2 in this way, and we're all so excited that you are in the position.
Hello.
Let's start by hearing a bit about you and your position.
Thank you. Really happy to be here today, to get back out to the West Coast and meet so many of you. Really happy to be here in person to really make those personal connections. So you already said quite a bit about me, but Jennie Romer, I am, like you said, the first Deputy Assistant Administrator for Pollution Prevention. I think that speaks a lot to Biden-Harris administration's priorities and really of emphasizing pollution prevention, or also known as source reduction. So I'm really happy to be in this role. As you mentioned, a lot of my background over the last 15 years has been in plastic pollution reduction policy, and I was looking for a chance to really kind of zoom out and work on other things aside from plastics. I think I started in San Francisco. I was a law student in San Francisco when the first plastic bag ban in the US passed. And so I volunteered with Supervisor Mercury at the time's office, and I became a point person there for different cities calling from around the country and saying, hey, why did you do that? And how can we do it? And I really saw the need for someone to kind of corral a lot of activists that were working on that at the time. I made my own website about it, and I was working as an attorney for the law firm representing Center for Environmental Health. So I was working on toxics during the day, working on greenwashing, class actions, but I really thought that this plastics thing was interesting. And there wasn't a lot happening at the time, and so I made my own business cards, I went to press events, and I introduced myself as the expert in plastic reduction policy. And it turned out there wasn't much competition. So actually, there was strangely a couple of people who were competing for the title. But I went forward and really became that person. And then I also learned a whole lot about recycling along the way. And I published a book on Penguin last year called Can I Recycle This?, where I really looked at how recycling works and why plastics doesn't work a lot of the time. But then I got a call from EPA, and someone had recommended me for this political position. So I'm a political appointee and charged with overseeing the P2 program. And it was really something that I couldn't say no to. It was just a great opportunity to really be able to look at pollution prevention from a whole new angle. And so I rearranged my whole life. I have a 1.5-year-old. I heard that you also have a baby. And so I moved the baby and myself to Washington, D.C., and I see my husband on the weekends. So it's a whole thing. But I'm really happy to be in the position. I grew up in Richmond, California, which is home to very heavy industry. And so I learned that, it brings jobs, but a lot of the time brings a lot of other things. A lot of pollution in Richmond, and really saw the disparities there. I grew up on the other side of town from the refinery, but I really saw the disparity, and I'd like to use my position to the extent that I can in addressing some of that as much as I can. So really appreciate the panel earlier on that as well. So that's a lot about me.
Nice. And when you say plastic pollution, was it microplastics? Was it just general, maybe even plastics in oceans?
Yeah, so the first thing that I ever worked on were plastic bags. And at that time, the whole point of a lot of plastic bag policies was to have people just remember to bring their own bags or not get a bag if they're just getting an item or two. And at the time, when San Francisco first passed their policy, I thought, oh, that's simple. Of course it'll just catch on. But then I saw a PowerPoint presentation where industry was willing to spend $700,000 to defeat San Francisco's policy alone for a budget. And I thought, wow, okay, this is a bigger deal than I thought it was. And really, so then I just spent a lot of time as an advocate inserting myself where I thought I would make a difference. And so plastic bags were kind of the first thing because that was something that's so visible in the environment. So they're uniquely aerodynamic, get caught up in the wind, end up in trees. And so that's something that people can really see and want to take action on. And so that's something where there are over 500 local and state plastic bag laws now in the country. And then kind of it evolved into looking at foam foodware, straws, and then now you're seeing foodware laws. So I was kind of, at Surfrider, I was overseeing that whole trajectory, and then looking now at extended producer responsibility laws for packaging was kind of where I exited that world and came over to this world. But at Surfrider, I was really looking at plastic pollution from the lens of ocean protection. And so then also looking at microplastics and how plastic in the ocean breaks down into microplastics.
Yeah, I'm from Texas, and they try to propose something like that just 10 years ago, and that's a no-no.
Yeah. Well, it was
Different
interesting.
in cultures. It's the difference in cultures. How's this? Yeah.
Well, I did work in Texas. I worked with a local group there on a amicus brief to the Texas Supreme Court for the Laredo case that got all the way to the Supreme Court. And we worked on a briefing with a local cattle rancher and the Cotton Ginners Association that wanted to have their own local laws. And so just looking at it from a very different, very Texas perspective was interesting. And I helped write that brief and looking at exactly what happens if you think your cow swallowed a plastic bag. And that ended up in the minority opinion, references to that. But just being able to step back and look more broadly and meet people where they're at. But still is a place where essentially
We're years behind. Oh,
yeah.
I shouldn't say we.
There are a whole lot of states where local plastics bans are preempted, and Texas essentially is one of those places.
Right. Okay, question number 2. Most of us know the P2 program at EPA pretty well, but mostly through P2 grants. The P2 program is more than just that, right? So can you talk a bit about the P2 under your portfolio?
Sure. Well, one program, I'm part of that program, which we heard about in the last session, is the Safer Choice program. So I have my button on. And so that's a program that I oversee, but really suffered a bit under the last administration, was no longer a branch. Now we've restored Safer Choice to its own standalone branch again. So yeah, that's exciting. but we still lack the resources to, for some of that, so that's something we're pushing for. But part of my job is figuring out where do we go next with the Safer Choice program. And part of it is we have a summit coming up next month, so we're actually in a couple weeks now, it's very soon. So for those of you who are on the fence about going, I recommend going to the Safer Choice Summit in DC. And that is a chance to really talk about, talk with our partners, stakeholders. So I have to revisit that word after the last session. But to really talk about a communications plan that I want Safer Choice to be something that everyone knows about. When people are shopping for their for cleaning products at the store, to be looking for that label, and so really increasing consumer awareness. And I come from a community organizing background. I worked on plastic pollution laws. I also worked as a community organizer in North Brooklyn. And so I've kind of had this grassroots experience of creating communication plans. And so I really want to try to bring some of that, and I made a little video with my baby Rain to promote Safer Choice, and really wanting NGOs, businesses to do their own communications, but to have us all do it in a way where we have a time when there's a bump in communication, maybe in the spring. So looking at that, what can we do as far as communications? What can we do as far as figuring out where else programs should be going, as far as what product categories we might want to get into, other than what we're currently in. So, but it's a great program because it has support from NGO community, local governments, businesses, formulators, and so it's just a matter of where do we steer it, and how do we get that support built for the program. So that's a lot about Safer Choice. I also oversee the Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program, which is a mouthful, EPP. And so I've been doing some work there with federal procurement, specifically focusing on a few areas, including PFAS. So I'm working with an intergovernmental group, looking at federal purchasing and how can we decrease or eliminate, but at least decrease the products that we're buying that contain PFAS. And so that is challenging, to say the least. And first identifying, where those problem areas are, and what alternatives are available, what certifications are available, but really starting to communicate that to eco-label and standard organizations so that they can, we've seen some stepping up to address it, but there's still so much work to be done there. We're also looking a bit at plastics in that space, at climate, and so that's EPP, then the P2 grants that I think many people in the room know a lot about the P2 grant program. But there's a whole infusion of money into the P2 grant program through the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Yay.
And so, that brings $100 million in infusion over 5 years into the program, and yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's tough just to spend that much.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah, but we want to make sure that we're spending it wisely and making sure that we're building upon prior success. So there's a lot to manage there, and with the Inflation Reduction Act. That brings in another $350 million just focused on low embodied carbon in construction materials. So that's a lot of money. We've been involved with the Biden Task Force within the federal government, but really taking kind of what we've been talking about in kind of a study group, basically, for the Biden Task Force to now have the money and have to move forward with implementing it. So I think there's a huge opportunity to address climate there, but we just have to make sure that we get it right.
Right.
So
exciting. Yeah. Okay, next question. The Biden-Harris administration has prioritized environmental justice and fighting climate change across the federal government. What does that mean from your perspective?
Sure. So on his first day in office, President Biden announced that his administration would deliver on environmental justice and tackle climate change. So with the last panel on environmental justice, there were just a few things I wanted to raise there, but I didn't want to take any time away from that panel. But there are just 4 things I wanted to bring up with kind of zooming out to a EPA headquarters perspective there. And so one is that EPA just established a new Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights on September 24th. So that's really exciting. That will have at least 200 people spread between headquarters and regional offices, specifically focused on environmental justice. So that's a big deal. Second is the Justice 40 initiative, and so that initiative is to bring at least 40% of the benefits from certain federal spending to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by pollution. And so the P2 grant program is one of the ways to deliver on that Justice 40 promise, but there's a whole lot of work to do in that area to not only to achieve that, but also to figure out ways to measure what that 40% looks like. And then with our P2 grants, we added some environmental justice and climate criteria to this last round that was just announced for the bill-funded P2 grants. But we're kind of going to be doubling down in this next RFA that we're putting together now on really how to target communities with environmental justice concerns, make sure we're really bringing those P2 resources to communities that are in or near industrial facilities that are of particular concern. And then lastly, we also developed a EJ P2 map kind of related to that first RFA, but really building upon that as well. So I think those are different ways to get that we're getting to environmental justice, but there's so much work to be done, and I was happy to hear in that last panel safer choice mentioned quite a bit. And so that's another way that is a little bit more tangible, I think, to get to environmental justice. And so one of the ways that one of the things we've been talking about is how do we get safer choice certified products into the hands of people who use them every day, to janitorial staff and custodial staff, commercially, or people who are working in homes. And so we've had some good conversations so far, and that's going to be a focus of our upcoming grant program as well. And so I'm excited to have those conversations and really to get, also conversations about how can we get some safer choice products at price points that are really more accessible as well.
You're going to be a busy bee.
I know, I have limited time. I'm an appointee, so I have, at least 2 years, and I want to get as much done as I can. So I'm making that list.
Excellent. Next question. P2 at EPA has gotten a big boost from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and most recently the Inflation Reduction Act. You just mentioned that. Can you first talk about bipartisan infrastructure bill and how that is impacting P2 at EPA?
Yeah, so maybe I got a little bit ahead of myself with that one, but just talking about how the bipartisan infrastructure law brought in that $100 million of additional money. And so with this latest round of P2 grants, we announced the 39 grants for about $12 million that were funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then again, last week we announced $9 million that funded the recurring grant program. And so we did a big check yesterday, a press conference with Oregon DEQ, one of our bill grantees. So excited to see that moving forward, and I think we'll be announcing all of the regional or Region 9, 10 grant winners later today. But really happy to see that infusion into the program, figuring out how we can grow that. And I know that there are a lot of questions about NEAs and things like that, so we want to make sure that we have all those conversations. And there is a P2 grantee meeting coming up in early December. So anyone who doesn't have that, save the date. Let me know.
And in person or virtual, is that correct?
Yes, both options. Yeah, and then we touched briefly on the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's something that is incredibly exciting and is something that we will be doing some hiring for very soon. So I'm planning, follow me on LinkedIn, and I'm planning, I know Holly Elwood posts quite a bit on LinkedIn, but we want to make sure that we really get great candidates into that's going to be housed within our environmentally preferable purchasing program of people who want to work on low embodied carbon and construction materials. And there are conversations happening about that all over the country. States are adopting laws, but we really want to make sure we're setting that example. And we're setting, this labeling program will be followed by the federal government. And that's a huge source of procurement, billions of dollars. And so real chance to make a difference.
Excellent. Final question, and I think you touched upon it. The Inflation Reduction Act will also have a big impact for the P2 program. Can you talk about it and what it will do for the program? You kind of pretty much covered that pretty well.
I think we did that one.
Yeah. So I guess now we're going to open it up to you guys. You guys have written on your, there you go, we've got the first question over here, and here's the microphone.
We have a couple of questions. There are note cards and pens on the table, so if you are thinking of questions, write it down, raise it up. Kendra or Rebecca and I will come by and grab it. There are a couple of questions here that I have. The first is just sort of reflecting on your experience with EPA. So what are you finding is most rewarding working with EPA? And on the flip side, what do you find is either difficult or frustrating working with a big federal agency like us?
I'm finding it incredibly rewarding so far, and just the kind of scale of difference in the conversations I get to have. And so, saying, "Oh, I have a meeting at the White House today," or "I'm going to meet the Pentagon." These are not things that I would have said in my normal life a couple of years ago, and just being able to be in the conversation. And I think, with this administration, having people who really want to tackle these issues, including things like environmental justice and PFAS. So, really happy to be here, but I will say that being in the federal government, there's a whole lot of bureaucracy. I knew there would be, but there's even more than I thought. And it's kind of surprising sometimes not knowing whether something's going to be easy or hard. So, sometimes thinking that, this seems like this should be a very simple thing that maybe will take a day and it will take 6 months versus something that I think will be really difficult ends up just being super easy as long as you find the right person. So I've been in this position for almost a year now, which is pretty wild. And I'm still figuring out, understanding the bureaucracy, but still figuring out kind of what the easy versus hard things are.
Thank you. And I'm looking to Jean to do a time check. Do we have time for another question?
We do. You know what? Our next thing starts at 1:30.
I'll do one more.
One or two.
Yep. So there are a couple of questions here that are really focused on what success looks like, what we can envision for the future. This is a pretty forward-looking group. We like to imagine what could be, and so, what does success look like? And more specifically, here we have this historic opportunity with the bill funding, and we know that $100 million is a huge change, but is only going to last 5 years. And so this question is, we've got some really terrific pollution prevention assets here in the West, as well as in other regions, and so examples include Torrey's Lab in Massachusetts, MnTAP's customer relations system, Washington and Texas lean partnerships with manufacturing extension programs. So how do you envision, what would success look like at the end of the bill infrastructure funding? What's the P2 community infrastructure look like, and how is that stronger, or your vision for making it stronger 4 or 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about quite a bit in talking, we have NEAs in place for a reason, and so figuring out within those NEAs what's the best mechanism for sharing information across the country. I know there's a lot of work within states that's great, but how do we communicate that? And so I don't want to add in layers of bureaucracy unless they're needed, and if you create a website, it's not gonna help if no one looks at it. So figuring out, I think for each NEA, what makes the most sense there, and where are there industry associations, how can we really plug in and partner to make sure that we're doing the best information sharing that we can. And then I will say separately, or relatedly, that with the bill-funded grants, we have a new national emphasis area for businesses in Indian country. And so we have 5 bill-funded grants directly to tribes and 1 recurring grant, and then we also have a program at Montana State University looking at incorporating TK into with P2, and so that's something I'm really tracking, and I want to see how we can grow that work with tribes, and I think that's something that we can accomplish, or I can accomplish within while I'm here and within that 5-year period.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Just on behalf of everyone here at EPA, we're so pleased that you were able to join our conference and share your wisdom with us. I'm going to turn it back to Ed here to close this out.
Thank you, Ed, for thinking of this idea.
It's my pleasure, and round of applause. On behalf of Pink Heresy, I'd like to give Jenny a gift, and this is a Portland-based or Oregon-based coffee from a company called NOSA. Is it NASA? NOSA Familia. And they are participants in Visa Consul's OAC program. So, yeah, so we hit 2 birds with 1 stone.
Great, thank you, I love coffee.